Dust fell from the rafters of the royal archives the moment the Alpha King's beast breached the iron root doors. For 340 years, the sovereign spirit had rejected every highborn lady. Today, it bypassed the royal court entirely, stopping at the desk of a 22-year-old ink-stained clerk. Historical logs from the citadel of Ethelgard date the incident precisely to the 14th of October, 1244. To the nobility, it was the day the royal lineage fractured. To the lower wards, it was the day a myth breathed violently back to life. Isolda possessed no noble titles, no grand estates in the sprawling valleys of the West, and certainly no lycanthropic heritage. She was a senior record clerk, a woman whose days were measured in the scent of iron gall ink, melting sealing wax, and crumbling vellum. She earned 4 copper coins a week organizing the taxation ledgers of the Hathaway dynasty. She was entirely unremarkable, save for a sharp, unyielding memory and a pragmatic disposition that kept her grounded in the damp subterranean levels of the citadel. On that particular Tuesday, the upper echelons of the castle were swept up in a frenzy of silks, perfumes, and political maneuvering. It was the right of choosing. King Aleister Hathaway, the ruthless and heavily scarred sovereign of the Western Territories, was undergoing the brutal transition that had claimed the sanity of many Alpha Kings before him. The Hathaway curse was well documented in the medical journals of the era. By a king's 30th year, his inner wolf would grow too powerful for a human mind to contain. The only salvation was the selection of a keeper, a mate chosen not by the man, but by the beast itself, a soul perfectly attuned to anchor the king's humanity. The tragic reality, kept fiercely guarded by the royal council, was that the Hathaway wolf had not found a keeper in over 3 centuries. The last was Queen Genevieve in the year 904. Since then, successive kings had been forced into arranged marriages to secure heirs while their inner beasts slowly drove them to madness, early graves, or abdication. Up in the Great Hall, 200 of the kingdom's most eligible pure-blooded women stood in terrified anticipation. Lady Beatrice of House Cresson, a viciously ambitious duchess, was the favored candidate. Isolda, meanwhile, was 3 floors below the earth, trying to decipher a water-damaged property deed from the province of Oakhaven. The first sign of the anomaly was the silence. The heavy, rhythmic chanting that had reverberated through the stone floors from the great hall abruptly ceased. Then came the screams. Not shrieks of celebration, but panicked, visceral terror. Isolda paused, her quill hovering over a fresh sheet of parchment. A low, concussive tremor shook the dust from the vaulted ceilings. Heavy, clawed footsteps echoed on the spiral stone staircase. Something was descending into the archives. "Master?" she called, assuming the head archivist had dropped a crate of lead-bound tomes. There was no answer, only a deep, rattling snarl that seemed to vibrate directly in the marrow of her bones. The heavy oak doors of the archive, reinforced with iron and meant to withstand a siege, did not simply open. They were blown inward, splintering into jagged shards across the stone floor. Through the dust and settling debris stepped a nightmare. He was entirely shifted, standing on 2 legs but hunched with lethal, coiled muscle. The Alpha King's beast was a terrifying mass of midnight fur tipped in silver, with claws that gouged deep trenches into the ancient stone with every step. His eyes were pools of molten gold, wild, feral, and utterly devoid of human reason. Behind him, scrambling down the stairs, were a dozen royal guards led by Commander Godwin, their silver-tipped spears trembling in their hands. They were under strict orders not to harm the king, but they were entirely powerless to stop him. The beast stalked through the rows of towering bookshelves, tearing ancient manuscripts from their bindings with careless swipes of his massive shoulders. He was hunting. Isolda's breath trapped itself in her throat. Protocol, survival instincts, and sheer logic demanded she run or hide beneath her heavy oak desk. Instead, she stood frozen, a jar of black ink clutched defensively to her chest. The beast rounded the corner of the Oakhaven section and stopped. The silence that followed was agonizing. The monster, towering at nearly 7 feet, locked his golden eyes on the petite, trembling clerk. The scent of fear in the room was palpable. Yet the wolf did not lunge. He leaned forward, closing the distance in one fluid, impossibly fast motion. Isolda squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the tearing of flesh. Instead, a hot, rhythmic breath washed over her face. She opened her eyes to find the massive predator mere inches away. The feral madness in his golden eyes was rapidly cooling, shifting into something entirely different. Recognition. Absolute, unwavering devotion. The beast lowered his massive, terrifying head and pressed his wet nose firmly against the pulse point of her neck. In the forgotten basement of the citadel, the terrifying form of the wolf began to recede, giving way to the scarred, heavily muscled, and unconscious human form of King Aleister Hathaway. The transition from the subterranean archives to the Sunspire was violent, political, and dizzying. Within an hour, Isolda found herself locked inside the king's private bedchamber, guarded by 4 elite sentries who looked at her with a mixture of reverence and deep suspicion. The royal council was in an uproar. Through the heavy mahogany doors, Isolda could hear the venomous shouting of Lord Balthazar, the king's chief advisor. "She is a commoner, a rat from the paper sellers," Balthazar spat, his voice echoing down the corridor. "The Edict of 912 strictly forbids the mingling of the royal Lycan bloodline with human peasantry. The beast is confused. The rite was sabotaged." "The beast is never confused, Balthazar," Commander Godwin retorted, his tone like grinding stone. "You saw it. We all saw it. It submitted. If you wish to go in there and tell the king his wolf made a mistake, you are welcome to offer your throat to him." Inside the opulent, gold-leaf chamber, Isolda sat stiffly in a velvet armchair, clutching her satchel of ledgers to her chest like a shield. She felt entirely out of place, her simple gray woolen dress clashing with the imported silk rugs. A low groan drew her attention to the massive canopy bed. Aleister Hathaway was waking. Even in human form, the king was an intimidating presence. He was built like a warhammer, with broad shoulders, a torso crisscrossed with the silver scars of border skirmishes, and a sharp aristocratic jawline shadowed by dark stubble. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, the silk sheets pooling around his waist. His striking pale blue eyes snapped open. For a second, the feral gold of the wolf flashed in his irises before settling. He scanned the room with predatory speed until his gaze locked onto hers. The physical reaction was instantaneous. The rigid tension in Aleister's jaw vanished. His shoulders dropped, and a profound, agonizing wave of relief washed over his features. The crushing, suffocating pressure he had felt in his mind for the last 3 years, the constant clawing demand of the beast trying to break free, was completely silent. "Because she was here." "You?" Aleister rasped, his voice raw and unused. Isolda immediately stood, executing a clumsy, overly stiff curtsy. "Your Majesty, I assure you, I did not ask for this. I was merely cross-referencing the agricultural yields of the western farmlands." "Come here," he commanded softly. It wasn't a request. The magnetic pull of the Alpha's voice compelled her forward until she stood beside the bed. His scarred hand gently wrapped around her wrist. He didn't pull her into bed. He merely pressed his thumb against the pulse point of her wrist, closing his eyes as he felt the steady, calming rhythm of her heart. 340 years, Aleister murmured, more to himself than to her. He opened his eyes, looking at her with a terrifying intensity. "They paraded duchesses and princesses before me, draped in jewels and soaked in expensive perfumes. And my wolf wanted nothing but the scent of old paper and black ink." "It is a mistake, sire," Isolda said, trying to keep her voice professional, though her pulse was racing beneath his touch. "Lord Balthazar is right. I am nobody. I am a record clerk." "You are my keeper," Aleister corrected, his grip tightening fractionally. "My soul is tethered to yours, Isolda. If you leave this room, my beast will tear down the citadel stone by stone to get back to you." The use of her full name sent a shiver down her spine. He already knew who she was. "But the court will never accept it," she whispered, glancing toward the door as the arguing outside continued. "Lady Beatrice has the backing of the High Lords. I have a desk. A dark, dangerous smirk touched the corner of Alistair's mouth. The High Lord's answer to me, and if they forget, I will remind them. But the political reality was far deadlier than a simple disagreement over a marriage pact. Isolda wasn't just anxious about her lack of status. Her analytical mind was already piecing together a terrifying puzzle. Later that evening, after Alistair had dressed and departed to violently enforce his will upon the council, Isolda was left alone in the royal chambers. Unable to sit still, she opened her leather satchel and pulled out the vellum scroll she had been working on when the wolf attacked the archives. It was the Oakhaven Tithes of 1239. She spread it across the king's mahogany writing desk, holding a candelabra close. As a senior clerk, Isolda was an expert at finding discrepancies. For months, she had noticed small, almost imperceptible alterations in the kingdom's financial and bloodline registries. Someone was systematically rewriting history. She traced her ink-stained finger over a specific entry regarding the Crescent estate, Lady Beatrice's family. According to this ledger, the Crescent family hadn't been paying the iron tax for a decade. But more damning was the birth registry beneath it, signed by Master Hellman, the head archivist. The signature was a flawless forgery. Lady Beatrice was not a pure-blooded Lycan. Her grandmother had been a human concubine, a fact that, under the ancient laws Lord Balthazar so loved to quote, completely disqualified Beatrice from ever ascending to the throne. Isolda's breath hitched. They knew. Lord Balthazar and Master Hellman were orchestrating a massive fraud to place Beatrice on the throne, controlling the volatile king through a false mate. And Isolda, in her meticulous daily cross-referencing, had stumbled directly onto the fault line of their treason. The wolf hadn't just chosen her because of a spiritual tether. The alpha's absolute supernatural instinct to protect the pack from rot and betrayal had sensed the one person in the citadel holding the truth. A soft click echoed in the quiet chamber. Isolda froze. The heavy lock on the king's private door was turning. But Alistair had taken the only key, locking her inside for her own protection. The door creaked open, revealing the dark corridor. The royal guards were gone. In their place stood a figure cloaked in the dark crimson robes of the council's elite assassins. A jagged, silver-coated blade gleamed in their hand. Silver, the only metal that could slow a Lycan and absolutely lethal to a human. A pity, the assassin hissed, stepping into the room and closing the door behind them. Lord Balthazar warned you were too observant for a peasant. You should have stayed in the basement, little clerk. Isolda backed away, her hand blindly gripping the heavy brass candelabra on the desk. She was trapped in the highest tower of Ethelgard, far from the safety of her archives, about to be erased from history just like the ledgers she protected. But as the assassin lunged forward, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a deafening, monstrous roar shook the very foundations of the Sun Spire. The Alpha King had returned. The heavy mahogany doors did not simply open. They detonated inward, showering the bedchamber in jagged splinters. Before the assassin's silver-coated blade could descend, a blur of midnight fur and violently shifting muscle intercepted him. Alistair Hathaway did not fully transform. There was no time, but the beast surged to the surface of his skin. His eyes burned with feral, molten gold, and his hands elongated into deadly, iron-hard claws. He caught the assassin by the throat, hoisting the cloaked figure into the air with a sickening crunch of cartilage, and slammed him against the stone wall with enough force to crack the mortar. The assassin dropped his silver dagger, clawing desperately at the king's suffocating grip. The man's cowl fell back, revealing the bruised, terrified face of Sir Purcell Croft, a high-ranking knight strictly loyal to Lord Balthazar's faction. "Give me one reason," Alistair snarled, his voice distorted and layered with the guttural growl of the wolf. "Why I should not tear your head from your shoulders and leave it on Balthazar's desk." "Alistair, stop." Isolda's voice rang out, remarkably steady despite the chaotic violence unfolding before her. The effect was instantaneous, the murderous tension radiating from the king fractured. He breathed heavily, his golden eyes darting toward Isolda. The beast inside him, ravenous for blood and vengeance, immediately yielded to the anchor of her voice. Aleister released his grip, letting Sir Purcell crumple unconscious to the floor, gasping for air. Aleister crossed the room in 2 strides, his human features restoring themselves, though his chest still heaved. He grabbed Isolda by the shoulders, his eyes scanning her for any trace of injury. "Did he touch you?" Aleister demanded, his voice thick with raw panic. "I am entirely unharmed," Isolda replied, her hands trembling slightly as she reached up to rest her palms against his chest, instinctively soothing him. But he was not here merely to kill a peasant. He was here to destroy evidence. She pulled away gently and pointed to the king's writing desk. The Oakhaven tithes of 1239 lay open, illuminated by the flickering candelabra. "Look at the registry," Isolda instructed, shifting effortlessly back into her element. She was no longer a terrified target. She was a senior record clerk unraveling a discrepancy. Lady Beatrice's bloodline is fraudulent. Her grandmother was a human, rendering Beatrice ineligible for the throne. Master Hellman forged this document to hide it. Aleister stared at the parchment, his jaw tightening. "Balthazar has been maneuvering Beatrice into my path for 3 years. He knew the Edict of 912 would invalidate her. If they forged this, what else have they manipulated?" "That is exactly what we must find out," Isolda said, her eyes narrowing with analytical focus. "Master Hellman has restricted access to the Lancaster vault in the lower catacombs for the past decade. He claimed it was due to water damage. If there are original, unaltered records, they will be there." Within the hour, the king of the Western Territories and a 22-year-old clerk were making their way through the subterranean tunnels of Ethelgard. Aleister carried a torch, casting long, dancing shadows against the ancient stonework, his senses on high alert. Isolda carried a ring of heavy iron keys she had discreetly lifted from Master Hellman's desk earlier that day. They reached the heavy iron grate of the Lancaster vault. Isolda unlocked it, the hinges screaming in protest as Aleister pushed it open. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of undisturbed dust and decaying parchment. Isolda bypassed the standard taxation shelves, moving straight toward the rear of the vault, where the iron-bound family chronicles were chained to the stone walls. She ran her fingers over the faded leather spines, searching for the true census of the year 1222, the year she was born. She pulled a heavy, brass-latched tome from the shelf and set it on a stone reading pedestal. Aleister held the torch closer as she flipped through the thick vellum pages. "Here," Isolda whispered, her breath catching in her throat. She traced her finger down the page, stopping at the name Abigail Marrow, her mother. But unlike the public records upstairs, this private, sealed ledger contained a striking addendum in red ink. Abigail Marrow, true lineage, de Montfort, daughter of Lord Arthur de Montfort, fled the capital during the purge of 1210. "De Montfort," Aleister murmured, his blue eyes widening in profound shock. Isolda looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. The de Montforts were wiped out by a plague 70 years ago. The historical records state they all perished in the eastern provinces. "It was not a plague," Aleister said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. "It was a massacre. The de Montforts were the oldest, purest line of keepers in the kingdom. Queen Genevieve, the last keeper 300 years ago, was a de Montfort. When she died, my ancestors lost more than their keeper. They lost the balance that kept their power under control. The council realized that as long as a king had a keeper, he could not be controlled. The horrifying truth settled over them both like a suffocating shroud. The royal council, led by Lord Balthazar's grandfather, had systematically hunted down and murdered the entire de Montfort bloodline to ensure that no Alpha King would ever find his true mate again. They wanted unstable, insane monarchs who would rely entirely on the council's governance. Isolda's mother had survived by abandoning her noble name, fleeing into the peasantry, and raising Isolda as a commoner in the very citadel that had sought to kill her. The wolf hadn't just chosen a random clerk. It had recognized the ancient, dormant blood of the true keepers running in her veins. "They erased your family to cage my ancestors," Aleister growled, the torchlight catching the predatory fury returning to his face. Balthazar has been holding this kingdom hostage for generations. He sent an assassin tonight because he realized my wolf found the one thing they thought they had eradicated. Isolda carefully closed the heavy ledger and unhooked it from its chain, clutching the massive book to her chest. She looked at the Alpha King, her pragmatic, clerk-like demeanor hardening into something forged in steel. Then we will not let him hide behind his forgeries any longer, Isolda stated coldly. Tomorrow morning, the council convenes to formally petition for Lady Beatrice's mating ceremony. We are going to audit them. The Great Hall of Ethelgard was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation. Towering stained-glass windows cast fractured pillars of colored light across the marble floors, illuminating the crescent-shaped table where the 12 high lords of the royal council sat. At the center sat Lord Balthazar, a man whose silver hair and tailored velvet robes masked a ruthless, draconian ambition. Beside him stood Lady Beatrice, draped in heavily embroidered emerald silk, looking every bit the tragic, expectant queen. My lords, Balthazar addressed the chamber, his voice echoing with feigned sorrow. We mourn the tragic events of last night. The beast's madness has reached a fever pitch. We have received word that the peasant girl from the archives, in a fit of hysteria, threw herself from the Sunspire. Her body has yet to be recovered, but we must act swiftly for the king's sanity. He gestured toward Lady Beatrice. The Edict of 912 demands a pure-blooded union. For the stability of the realm, the king must mate with Lady Beatrice by nightfall, or we must invoke the right of regency and relieve him of his crown. A murmur of agreement rippled through the corrupt council members. You will invoke nothing, Balthazar. The heavy oak doors of the great hall slammed open. King Aleister Hathaway strode into the room, not in his royal finery, but in the dark, boiled leather armor of a war commander. Walking perfectly in step beside him, very much alive, was Isolda Marrow. She did not wear silk or jewels. She wore the stark black, heavy woolen robes of a high magistrate of the archives, carrying a massive brass-bound ledger in her arms. Balthazar's face drained of color, his eyes darting toward the side doors where Commander Godwin and heavily armed royal guards were filtering in, securing the exits. What is the meaning of this? Balthazar demanded, slamming his fist on the table, though his voice trembled. Guards! Arrest that peasant woman for trespassing in the high chamber. Commander Godwin did not move. He stood at attention, his eyes fixed firmly on his king. Aleister stopped at the center of the hall, his presence alone commanding absolute, terrifying silence. He looked at Balthazar with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator cornering its prey. The peasant woman is my keeper, and today she is your judge. Isolda stepped forward. She did not shrink beneath the burning gazes of the high lords. She walked directly to the council table and dropped the heavy doomsday ledger of 1210 onto the polished wood with a resounding slam. Lord Balthazar, Isolda began, her voice clear, authoritative, and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You stand accused of high treason, the falsification of royal ledgers, and the systematic extermination of the de Montfort bloodline. Preposterous! Lady Beatrice shrieked, her aristocratic composure breaking. She is a rat from the paper sellers. She knows nothing. Isolda didn't even look at her. She opened the ledger to a marked page. Lady Beatrice, according to the authentic birth registries kept in the Lancaster vault, your grandmother, Rosalind, was a human baker from the eastern provinces. Under the very edict of 912 you so desperately cling to, your petition for the throne is legally void. Balthazar sneered, recovering his composure. You produce an ancient book and claim it is truth. The official records in the upper archives contradict this. Master Hellman verified them himself. Master Hellman used iron gall ink mixed with soot to forge those records. Isolda countered seamlessly, the ultimate master of her craft. A cheap substitute introduced to the kingdom only 5 years ago. Chemical analysis of the vellum proves the records were altered during your tenure as chief advisor. You fabricated a pure bloodline to control the king. She turned a page in the heavy ledger, her voice rising with power. Furthermore, this genuine ledger proves my own lineage. I am Isolda de Montfort, the last surviving heir of the Keepers. Your grandfather orchestrated the Purge of 1210 to ensure the Alpha Kings would go mad. You have kept this kingdom bleeding for 70 years to line your own pockets with the iron tax. The chamber erupted into chaos. Several lords shouted in defense, while others, realizing the depth of the betrayal, backed away in horror. Balthazar's diplomatic mask shattered. He signaled to the 4 elite mercenaries stationed behind the council table, men secretly armed with silver weaponry. Kill the girl. She is a liar and a witch. The mercenaries lunged over the table, drawing jagged silver swords. But Aleister had been waiting for this. For the first time in 340 years, an Alpha King shifted into his beast with absolute terrifying control. The transformation was instantaneous. The massive, midnight-furred wolf materialized in the center of the hall, roaring with a sound that shattered the stained glass windows. Yet there was no mindless slaughter. The wolf moved with tactical, lethal precision. It disarmed the first mercenary with a swipe of its massive paw, shattering the man's ribs, and caught the second silver blade in its teeth, snapping the metal in half. Through the chaos, Isolda stood perfectly still. The mystical, unbreakable tether between keeper and king was absolute. She anchored his mind, filtering the beast's rage into pure focus. She felt his heartbeat synchronize with hers. Within seconds, the mercenaries lay incapacitated on the marble floor. The giant wolf stalked slowly toward Lord Balthazar, who was backed against the stone wall, weeping in terror. The beast raised a massive claw, fully intent on taking the traitor's head. Aleister, enough. Isolda's voice cut through the hall, soft but commanding. The wolf stopped. It looked back at Isolda, its golden eyes clear and cognizant. The beast lowered its head in a gesture of submission to its mate before stepping back. Commander Godwin immediately seized Balthazar, dragging the weeping lord into custody as Lady Beatrice collapsed in a hysterical faint. The great hall fell deathly silent. The remaining lords stared in awe at the massive beast that peacefully retreated to the side of the young, ink-stained clerk. As the wolf shifted back into the scarred, heavily muscled form of King Aleister, he reached out, taking Isolda's ink-stained hand in his own. There, amidst the shattered glass and exposed lies, the king kissed the knuckles of his record clerk. Isolda de Montfort did not just become queen that day. She became the kingdom's greatest protector, ruling not from a throne of swords, but from a desk of indisputable truth, proving that while a beast commands fear, it is the master of records who truly controls history. Did you love this deep dive into the hidden history of the Hathaway dynasty? If Isolda's brilliant triumph over the corrupt royal council and her epic romance with the Alpha King kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this tale with your fellow fantasy lovers, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling real-life legends, dark romance mysteries, and untold mythological dramas. Let us know in the comments. What would you do if the Alpha's wolf chose you? Clears throat. Hi, my name is Fractured Oaths, the owner and manager of Fractured Oaths. After watching the video, the Alpha King's wolf had not chosen a keeper in 340 years. She was the record clerk it picked. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? I think one of the biggest ideas is that true worth isn't always found where people expect it. Seeing someone overlooked because of their position, yet becoming the one who made the biggest difference, gave this story a really satisfying emotional core. It reminds me never to underestimate quiet strength or genuine character. Which moment stood out to you the most? Do you think the wolf chose the right person from the very beginning, or did the story change your mind along the way? Maybe there's something we can all take from this by looking beyond titles and first impressions in our own lives. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more.